Welcome to Bonnie's Beat. I'm your host, Bonnie Squires. We're coming to you from Radnor Studio 21 in beautiful downtown Wayne. And we like to interview people who are doing important things in the community, whether someone is an author, someone is an actor, someone is an artist, someone is a professor. But our guest today, Thom Nickels, that's T-H-O-M, and we'll find out why he spells his name T-H-O-M. You've probably seen his name in various newspapers around town. And today we're going to talk about his 13th book. 13, I'm so jealous, Thom. Philadelphia Mansions. I don't know how many thousands of hours of research went into this. But it's not just Philadelphia Mansions, it's also mainline mansions. Hi, Thom.
Hi, Bonnie.
How did you get T-H-O-M as a spelling?
Good question. You're the only person who's ever asked me that on camera. That goes back to my first year in college when an English professor just started to call me T-H-O-M. And at that point, a T-H-O-M seemed revolutionary and bohemian and new. Well, it's not new anymore. Everybody is a T-H-O-M now, it seems to me. But when I told my parents that I was a T-H-O-M, i.e. with my first books, they would jokingly refer to me as Thom. Oh, here comes Thom. Here comes Thom. I got used to it very fast. Now I miss Thomas, and I actually wish that I had stuck to Thomas, but it's too late.
Oh, so legally your name is now...
No. It's just that I've done 13 books, and with all of my stuff, it's, you know, Thom is in the dry cement stage now.
What was the first book that you ever wrote?
The first book I ever wrote was called The Cliffs of Ares. It's a metaphysical science fiction book about Down syndrome children from other planets who are really entities with high intelligences who just appear like there's something wrong with them. And I use that word with a lot of empathy and love. And it was called The Cliffs of Ares. I self-published that. The only one of my books that I self-published. I will never do that again because you don't make money. They wind up in your basement in boxes. But right after I published that book, I got...
Well, wait a second.
Okay.
What interested you in the Down syndrome theme?
My youngest brother was born mentally retarded. Of course, that's not the PC term for it now. Today,
No, it's
I believe they call it
disability.
developmentally disabled, but that keeps changing.
Yes.
You know,
Now
every year there's another label. But at the time, he was just mentally retarded, and we loved him very, very much. His name was David. He did not have Down syndrome. He was a very, very handsome boy, but he also had the mentality of a 4-year-old. And very trying time for my parents and the family in general. So this is what kind of got me interested in that subject.
Very interesting. But he was not Down syndrome.
Not at all. He was extremely good looking. He did have a form of cerebral palsy. So when he walked, you know, there was a gait that was out of alignment, as you know, with
Yes.
some people who have cerebral palsy.
Okay. Now, how did you get into the journalism field? Where did you go to college?
I went to a small journalism school in Philadelphia, the Charles Morris Price School of Journalism and Advertising of the Poor Richard Club. That was only 1 year. I was the youngest guy in the class because they were all in their 20s, and then I went to a junior college in Baltimore, and then I finished up at Immaculata when I came home again as,
Immaculata.
as Thomas Wolfe
Down the
would
road
say.
from here.
Yes, yes.
And what did you major in?
Just liberal arts, English literature.
And your parents said, how's he going to make a living, right?
They said that you should have a side vocation because what if you don't make it? You should be able to do something else. It kind of horrified me because it almost sets you up psychically for failure. But in a way, I completely understand their point of view.
And what was your first job after graduating from Immaculata?
How do you like that? My first job, I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. So I did alternate service. And of course, I went to the Coatesville Draft Board. I was approved after a lot of grief and work. And at that time, you had to find a place to work which was at least 500 miles away from your home. No working in Phoenixville so you could commute home. So I had to pick a city. I was afraid to go to New York. I thought, haha, Boston is a lot like Philadelphia. It's a sister city. I can negotiate Boston. So I went to Boston on a Greyhound bus with $150 in my pocket.
And that lasted for a week, maybe?
Well, it lasted, but I found a job and a place to live within 2 days.
Wow.
So,
Resourceful.
well, I was up against the gun, so I had to do it.
Good pun.
Good pun, yes.
Your conscientious objector, up against the gun.
Yes, up against the gun. How do you like that?
So, I mean, I know people who fled to Canada to avoid being drafted. So, but conscientious objector. Well, what religion were you raised in?
I was a Catholic, but at the time I had left the Catholic Church. You know, when you're 20, you think you're an agnostic. You don't believe what your parents taught you. So I walked out of church on Ash Wednesday, created a big family drama. I have since retained a faith, but at that time, I had to do it solely on an agnostic base, which was kind of a double challenge. But I was never an atheist because I couldn't claim that.
How do you prove you're a conscientious objector to the military?
It's very, very difficult because they ask you 101 questions. They would, you know, they would say, well, what if a soldier came into your family's house with guns drawn and they wanted to kill your mother? And so I would say, well, that is a personal situation. I would defend my mother. I wouldn't sit there and watch the murder. But when you're put into a situation of war, you're volunteering for that. You're going out of your way to put yourself in a situation like that. And they apparently understood it.
Very interesting. So, is that considered metaphysical?
It's considered spiritual and philosophical. And so, yes, so they said, you are approved. So I found the job, and I worked in an operating room at Tufts New England Medical Center where I saw all sorts of operations for 2.5 years, and I grew up fast. So, you know, seeing autopsies, et cetera, and bringing body parts down to pathology makes you grow up fast.
Yeah. I spent 1 year every week visiting one of my favorite students from Yaden High School when I was my first job out of Penn. And his first week in Vietnam, he took a rocket to the foot, lost part of his foot, and they sent him to what was then Valley Forge Military Hospital. But because he never tried to commit suicide, he never got to see a psychiatrist because there were so many suicidal wounded soldiers at Valley Forge Military Hospital that the psychiatrists were overloaded and overwhelmed. So I went once a week, and I'd bring him candy and flowers and poetry books, and I did that every Wednesday for a year.
Good for you.
Well,
when I was in Harvard Square, that's where I lived, there were a lot of soldiers who went AWOL.
Say Harvard Square the right way.
Harvard Square.
Thank you.
Park the car in Harvard Square.
Square.
Yes, yes. Great place to be 21, let me tell you. Yeah. But there were guys who were AWOL all over Harvard Square, and they were like looking for crash pads. And there was a kind of an underground railroad then where people would shelter them for a couple of days and then pass them on to somebody else who would then put them on a bus to Vermont, closer and closer to Canada.
Canada.
So that's what we did for fun.
How did you get into journalism?
I've always been a writer since grade school, passing stories around to my classmates to entertain them. But with journalism specifically, I couldn't do anything else. In high school, I flunked math. It was very, very pathetic. I was a senior in a general math class. Just could not get the handle on math. But I got A's in English and A's in history. The teachers couldn't understand me. Idiot savant or something. I don't know what they said behind closed doors. But journalism I felt comfortable with. So that's what I did.
Where did you have your first article published?
Good question. Wayne Suburban Times.
Oh.
And we're back to the main line again, aren't we?
Yes.
This was an article on a bookstore in Paoli, ran by a woman with the last name of Randolph. It was an amazing bookstore. She had every kind of book. She had meticulous taste. So I did an article on that and an article on Loch Erie Mansion in Fraser when I interviewed one of the surviving sisters.
What is it? I don't remember. I know you've got it in your book.
Yes.
But I forget what Loch Erie is.
Loch Erie was the Gothic blue limestone house designed by Addison Hutton in 1865, and it was built by the nation's chief manufacturer of the men's paper collar. And he built it as a grand estate, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres. It had its own post office, its own train station.
Oh, my.
And, you know, he had a son and two daughters. And the son died in the 40s. He died well before that, and his wife before that. But the two daughters lived until about 1966, 67, 68.
Well, one of the stories that you research and write about, La Ronda. What a heartbreaking story it was for those of us who value history, who value architecture, and who demonstrated and begged the guy who bought the property, don't tear it down, but he tore it down anyway.
See, that's what got to me, because they were on their knees before this man with all sorts of counter proposals,
right,
in utter supplication. They did everything but burn themselves up like Buddhist monks during the Vietnam War. Nothing worked with this man. He was the coldest piece of human machinery. He turned down every offer, and of course, we all know what happened.
Yeah. And you've got photos in your book of the stages of the demolition of La Ronda. Oh, it hurt my heart to look at those photos.
They were hard to sort of put together and to sort of watch as a set piece. Yes.
Did you have to get permission from a lot of families in order to write about their history and their mansions?
Not really, because it's all from archival stuff. I went to the Chester County Library and I did the old newspaper thing. Some of it was on Google, some of it was from old books, some of it. So it was a combination of stuff that I had either read or I did, as you know, a lot of personal interviews.
Oh, when you say personal, there's a photo in here. Oh, we just looked at it. I don't know where it is now. Of your grandparents and your name for your grandfather, who was also...
Yes, Pauline Clavey Nickels. She before she met my grandfather, she was an opera singer in Wilmington. When she met my grandfather, he was an architect. He designed Nazareth Hospital. He also did a lot of schools in Reading and in the Philadelphia area. He got an assignment once from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia to sort of get the land rights so that they could build Nazareth Hospital. Well, since he was the architect, he felt competent to sort of do this, but the owner of the land happened to be Howard Hughes, who at that point was the quintessential Hollywood playboy with his own plane, having multiple affairs with a lot of women.
Mainly actresses.
Mainly actresses, but do you know what he did? There was always a run with him, with these actresses, when the honeymoon end of it expired and when it became more platonic, he never forgot them. He paid their rent long into the future, ad infinitum. So he never forgot any woman that he had an affair with. Anyway, that's a side story, a la Hollywood Babylon. But apparently, Howard Hughes came in to meet my grandparents because Howard Hughes wanted to review the blueprints of Nazareth Hospital, because the Archdiocese thought that they were going to get a deal. They were hoping for a reduction of the cost of the land. Well, they went back to my grandfather's house. I don't know where they went, maybe in the dining room or upstairs in my grandfather's architectural study. But Howard Hughes liked the hospital so much that he said, I'm just going to give the Archdiocese this land at no cost. And
Wow.
so, but what I find really ironic is that after the design of Nazareth Hospital, which has a slate Art Deco look, Howard Hughes then designed a plane of some sort that had an Art Deco look. And I thought, this is really weird. Did he get that from my grandfather's design? Now, this is a personal interpretation, but this is the first thing that I felt.
Isn't that interesting?
It's just odd.
Are there any artifacts from the time that Hughes visited your grandparents? I mean, did he give them an autographed picture or something?
You know, my grandfather, I used to consider him pompous when I was a boy. I was probably very afraid of him because with his pipes and cigars, he was a major authority figure. He was not a warm and cuddly type of a grandfather, more of a strict German who, you know, you had better be perfect around. So, but I did remember him. He would just name drop at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But as a kid, these names meant nothing to you. So if he had said Howard Hughes, it meant nothing.
Another chapter in your book, which also ties it to the main line, is your whole write-up about the Divine Lorraine Hotel, Father Divine, his history, and so on.
Well, I went to Woodmont with an artist friend of mine. He was
In
painting
Gladwin,
the
yeah.
interior on a canvas, and I was doing the article with it. So we had one of their banquet suppers. If you've never attended a
Oh,
banquet
yes.
supper,
Mother
at
Divine
Woodmont,
invited my husband and me years ago, and the Rosebuds come and they sing to you, and there's always an empty spot for Father Divine's
Father
spirit.
Divine,
Yes.
and then you listen
Although they
to
don't
his...
believe that he ever died, I don't think.
Well, that's true because they believe that he's God.
Yeah.
And which is a bit disconcerting when you really see the devotion and the adoration. But, you know, of course, as they pass the platters around, they're never allowed to touch the table. So they have all this incredible food. It's like 20 platters, and you just keep it, and they can never touch the table. And if they do, a man will tap you from behind, you know. But in any event, we had our private interview with Mother Divine in Father Divine's office, which was oddly enough modeled after the JFK Oval Office. So it really does feel like you're in a photo of the White House from the 1960s. Very, very strange. Mother Divine was going to resume contact with us because she liked us. But I think that the Rosebuds interfered, and that's part of the mystery of Woodmont, is that as Mother Divine aged, the Rosebuds kind of held her prisoner. And I think this is a topic for some investigation
That's
in the
interesting.
future.
I thought that she reigned supreme from what I saw.
She did reign supreme, but there is some speculation that she had dementia towards the end. And this is a fairly complex story, and it's probably my next project. So
interesting.
I
I just wrote a
know
column
some
about.
stuff.
I just wrote a column about my experience with Mother Divine and that wonderful dinner that we went to. But they had an interesting philosophy. Father Divine's philosophy, didn't believe in sexual relations between the sexes. So therefore, there are never any pregnancies. So therefore, they weren't ever going to be able to renew themselves because there wouldn't be any children.
Like the Shakers. So, and for the Mother and Father Divine, they did want an heir to sort of carry on the legacy and to sort of carry Woodmont into the future after Father Divine's death, etc. And they did find a kind of an heir through one of their peace mission emissaries in LA. She saw a boy by the name of Tommy Garcia. And so through a lot of politicking, Tommy came from a very poor family with an abusive father. So they got Tommy's mother to agree to drive out to Philadelphia with her son and her daughter and this peace mission emissary. And they basically handed over their children to Father and Mother Divine. And there's some controversy about that because there are elements of a benign kidnapping. So it gets very, very sketchy.
I knew about the son, quote unquote. I never knew about the daughter. What happened to the two of them?
You know, the golden son, Father Divine wanted a son. You know, it's like the emperor king wants a son.
Yeah.
So the daughter was probably valued, but when they came to Philadelphia in the car, they were put up in the Divine Lorraine Hotel.
On Broad Street?
But the daughter was put in a separate room, and she was not allowed to live at Woodmont, but she was forced to live in a Divine property in the city because they owned a lot of property in Center City. It was the son who got all the rich desserts and all the rich rewards. I think they took him to King of Prussia Mall and bought him a whole new wardrobe. And, you know, you'll never have to worry about a meal or a roof over your head. Your every need will be taken care of.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But they're still Father Diviners, and I know they were wonderful home health aides because when my grandmother was ailing, and this has gone back like 40, 50 years, we had a couple of Father Divine aides, and they were really devoted, wonderful. But if you called, you weren't allowed to say hello because it had the word hell in it.
Hell in
so
it.
you could never say hello. You had to discipline yourself. And
You had to say peace.
Peace, right.
Peace, peace.
Peace.
And I remember once in the mansion, I asked one of the Rosebuds if I could take photographs, and she just looked at me as if I had said, "May I take my clothes off?" It was a look of absolute horror. "No, you may not take pictures." I said, "Okay." You never crossed a Rosebud.
No. What was the most surprising thing you found in your research on all these many mansions and multimillionaires and people who left a permanent imprint on the region?
Tough question. The most surprising thing, I think it was with the Loch Erie Mansion, the whole history of that mansion. I grew up a stone's throw away from that house. So as children, it was pretty legendary. And I had always wondered what became of the ownership there, what the status of the house is, until one day in Center City in front of the Union League, I saw a homeless guy begging for money with a sign. And I gave him 50 cents, something about him. I thought, you know, he deserves 50 cents. I don't know why I thought this, but I followed my instincts, and he looked up at me and he said, "Oh, hi." And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from Fraser." I said, "Fraser? That's where I grew up." And I told him where I grew up, and he said, "That's where I grew up. I grew up in the Loch Erie Mansion. That's where I live now." So this was the homeless son of a guy named Tobias who actually owned Loch Erie for a number of years. So that set me off on a thorough examination of Loch Erie.
Wow. That he grew up in a multimillionaire's mansion, and he's a homeless guy begging in front of the
Begging
Union
in
League.
front, but of course he
Oh,
had a drug problem, and
and
so
mental
that's,
issues too.
you know, mostly the people on the street have a drug problem. Not always, but pretty much the vast majority do.
What? This is your 13th book.
Yes.
What's the range of topics you've covered in all of your other books?
Well, when I started out, I have an interest in religion, the metaphysical, and the spiritual. When I was a really vibrant gay activist, of course, I had to sort of get the whole gay thing through my system because I felt there was a lot of injustice and inequality in society. And at that time, there was.
What do you mean was?
Well,
What do you mean was?
at that time, there was. That's what I said.
It is.
I mean, I lived, well, not so much now. I mean,
Pretty much.
maybe from person to person, but I think so that my books concerned religion and spirituality. Two novellas, Walking on Water, that dealt with a Trappist monk who felt called to that kind of life, but he was gay. With the book after that, I did a book on gay and lesbian Philadelphia, which basically documented a lot of the history of the movement here in the city.
Has Mark Siegel interviewed you?
Well, I used to write for PGN. I used to
Oh,
have
okay.
multiple
Philadelphia Gay
columns
News.
in PGN.
I would see your
profiles,
stuff
and
in University City Review. That's where I used to see your stuff.
I still have a weekly column there. I
Yeah.
like to keep in touch with Bob and Claudia Christian. So
Oh, they're wonderful people.
even though I go to like national media, I like to keep a foothold there. It's I think
Do you
it's
make a
very
living
valuable.
as a freelance journalist? Have
It's
to
tough.
ask you.
It's tough. It's tough, but I do the theater income, the theater column for Icon, and I write for 3 or 4 newspapers, and I do books. So, and but it's tough.
Who distributes your books?
Well, it depends on the publisher. The History Press has not been my only publisher. Star Books Press in Florida published several of my books, 2 novels that I have written, and Arcadia published 3 books, and Agena Press in West Virginia.
And how to get people get copies of Philadelphia Mansions, which is a fabulous book. I mean, it's not just history; it's social activism. You find out everything you never thought about these famous people and what they did with their fortunes. How do people get a copy of Philadelphia Mansions?
Well, I would think they would just walk into their local bookstore, any Barnes and Noble store. The distribution with the History Press is very good.
And
So
Amazon?
this isn't like a subsidy thing where you have to, call up all the book deals yourself. Amazon, of course, and it'll be an ebook. I'll turn around one day and it'll be on the web as an ebook, and I won't even know that it happened.
Has it been reviewed yet? 'Cause
Not officially, although several publications do have copies, and I'm waiting for the reviews to kind of eke out. So far, nada, nothing.
well, what's the official publication date?
It was March 19th.
Oh, so it's just okay.
It's just a babe in swaddling clothes.
Right.
So we don't want a crib death here, do we? No.
Are you working on your next book already?
I have my eyes set on the Father Divine story with the adopted son, who was not so adopted. So I've been talking to Tommy Garcia's wife for many, many, many hours, and we have something in the mental Rolodex about that.
It's interesting because when I worked for Peter Leocoris at Temple University, Peter always wanted to purchase the Divine Lorraine Hotel for housing for Temple students, but he never had enough money to do it. And now, I forget who finally bought it recently and turned it into apartments. Have you seen it since
Yes,
it's been?
I did a tour, and they're very, very nice apartments. They're shaped a little oddly, but they're kind of unique. But the views of the city are incredible, and I love the windows. I actually like the odd shape, but it's a little different. It's a little different.
I remember many years ago talking to people who had gone to the Divine Lorraine Hotel to eat, but there was a separation between men and women, as I recall. They couldn't both, the men and women couldn't sit at the same table together. Is that
That
true?
well, I know that when I went to Woodmont, all the women sat on one side of the table and the men on the other. So there were no opposite sex pairings because then you would get strange under the tablecloth hand holding. And so we can't have that if there's no undue mingling of the sexes.
Yeah.
But I do know that yeah, that's what I know. Yeah.
And but they opened their doors. Apparently they had a kitchen that served anybody that came in that I don't know if they had to pay for the meal or they served them for free.
I think it was very, very cheap. I'm not sure about the free part. In a lot of ways, they were kind of modeled after the old Catholic worker houses in Manhattan with Dorothy Day and Peter Murian, that became so famous. Houses of hospitality, they used to call them.
Hmm.
So um, that's what it kind of reminds me of.
So you're going to be working on the Father Divine and
If I get a yes for the book proposal.
okay.
If not, I'll just find another publisher.
Well, which publisher did you pitch?
Oh, I can't. I don't want to
Oh, you
jinx
can't
it.
say. We
Yeah,
can't
I
jinx
don't
it. We
want to
can't
jinx
jinx
it.
it. We can't jinx it. Anyway, and are you working on a major story now for one of your newspapers?
I am working. Hmm. Gee, you stumped me there, Bonnie. I do
Didn't mean to.
I do my column for the Weekly Press. I think I have to interview somebody who is connected with a shrine. I write for PJ Media. I did a column on that homeless guy who gave that woman gas for $20. And as it turns out, we've been finding a lot of suspect stuff about that story. So
Oh,
anyway,
very interesting. Our guest today has been Thom Nickels, who's an author, a journalist, man about town, and a wealth of historical information. So we'll see everybody next week. Thanks, Thom.
thanks, Bonnie.